Well, I don't know about you, but at this stage of the week I'm absolutely shattered. And I've only been here 2 days. This is my first McGill, and I have to say I've thoroughly enjoyed it. But as Donald the Butler said to me last night, I sort of fell into good company last night, and I'm a little bit delicate today. But anyway, like Andrea, one of the challenges I had when thinking about today's topic was to define, even if it was just to myself, what exactly a young person is these days. And clearly there's the Barstool definition that if you're young, if someone calls you young and you take offence, and you're old, as soon as when someone calls you young, you get chuffed. But I think because we're all chuffed to be part of the young people's session, that maybe that's the wrong definition, particularly for as prestigious a platform as this one. And like Andrea, I also then said, well, the best thing I can do as a proper nerd is go off and look at some stats and find out what the median age is. And I came to a remarkably similar conclusion, given we were looking at the same statistics, that we're talking about people basically under the age of 35 or under the age of 40, if you want to be a little bit more generous. So when we look at those people born since the mid-1970s, what I'd like to do today is to discuss, like anyone who's had management consultancy training, I've always got 3 bullet points. I'd like to discuss 3 things today in relation to that younger generation. The first is to give my own perspective on what we mean by participation and reflect on some of the questions that are posed in the programme for today's session. The second is to outline some of the ideas that young people have put forward in the last year or so about getting Ireland out of its crisis, to show that, yes, young people have ideas and are contributing, and we need to listen. And lastly, I'd like to explain, to tackle the question head on, I'd like to explain why I believe that the generation born in the 1990s, the young of the young, will yet emerge as Ireland's luckiest generation. Naturally, as Rory said, when I speak, I'm really doing it from my own perspective, and I could never really claim to speak on behalf of all young people. And in fact, that's probably one of the first points I'd like to make, is that one of the questions for today's session asks, what is their view of politics and political institutions, and why do they not participate more? And this is a loaded question in a way, in 2 ways. Firstly, can we really claim that all young people have one view of politics and political institutions? Would we say that of other groups that we talk about? Would we say that of women or migrants or the elderly? And as long as we talk about young people as some sort of other that's out there, and they're the object of the discussion, it's going to be very difficult for them to become part of the discussion. And secondly, the question asked, why do they not participate more? And do we really know that they don't participate more? And Andrea touched on this quite well. And certainly, obviously, people fret about how few young people turn up to vote in elections. But if you look back, is it really any surprise that young people don't really bother that much to turn out and vote in an election? Civil war politics is not really a turn-on if you can barely remember the 1980s, let alone the 1920s. To young people born in Ireland who regard themselves as young Europeans, or indeed as global citizens, as Rory really showed in his opening remarks, we worry a lot about what's happening in the world. And we are Irish and we're proud to be Irish, but we regard ourselves as European citizens and global citizens as much as Irish citizens. And as I've mentioned, Tweedledum and Tweedledee, there hasn't really been an awful lot, certainly until recently, to get excited about in terms of national politics in Ireland. And I would say it's not just the content of Irish politics, it's also the context. It's come up a couple of times, but whatever about voting on a Thursday or a Friday, which is going to make it difficult for 18 to 20-year-old students to turn up, we don't even give 16 and 17-year-olds the vote. So how can we expect them to be interested? The other night I went to see Roger Daltrey play in Marley Park. He was the lead singer of The Who. As a friend, I texted a friend of mine and said, I'm going to see Roger Daltrey. And he said, who? And I said, yes. Sorry, Abbott and Costa on that one. Sure enough, during his concert, he played one of their biggest hits from what is now nearly a half a century ago, Talk About My Generation. And it struck me as he was singing, this guy born in the 1940s, talking about the generation born in the 40s and the 50s, a man approaching retirement age, that the song is very almost poignant, that it's now it's a retrospective. It was a song by brash upstarts, about a call to social action. Now it's looking at a generation, his generation, which holds the reins of power. And many young people today watching him would see him not singing an anthem for social revolution that they could sign up for. They see as an old man, nearly reaching retirement, singing a song about the past. And to me, the system we have in Ireland is set up a bit like Roger Daltrey and his song. We have a generation in control. They've set up a system to their tastes and often to their benefit. And they're puzzled as to why their children and grandchildren aren't particularly bothered about joining in. Because participation is not really a single-issue subject, vote or else. It's not a static concept either. I think the key to understanding participation in the modern world is to remember that there are hundreds of different ways of doing it, as Rory was saying. And as fashions change, so do ways of joining in. In fact, I have a bit of a confession to make. At every session I've been at this week, even as the chairs of the sessions have been urging us to turn off our phones, I've been playing away with mine. What I've been doing, though, is I've been sharing what's happening here at McGill with hundreds of people on Twitter and sharing what I think the key points are and interacting with people. And that's one example of what participation looks like these days. For me and for others like me, it seems alien to go to something really interesting and not share it with the rest of the world. And this leads me on to another question in the blurb for this morning's session, which is whether young people get more fulfillment from the web than they do from the environment in which they live and which they work. To me, this misses the point a little bit, because the web is not some alternative to the environment in which we live and work. It's a fundamental part of it. Most of the work that I do, most of the research that I do, is effectively online. In 2007, I got a job completely through online channels. The vast majority of people who are under 35, they work, they live, they chat, they buy music, they buy books, they make friends, they find new jobs, new places to live. They even find husbands and wives online. So participation is clearly going to look different if that's a crucial part of what it is to be a young person these days. So when people ask, do young people care anymore? My argument is yes, but it just shows up in different ways. What I'd like to do now is to take a few moments to go through some of the ideas, the interesting ideas, I think, that people under 40 have been putting forward into the public domain over the past year or past couple of years, as Ireland has faced a range of, whether you want to call it a crisis or a challenge, it's up to you. So here comes the shameless book plug. Earlier this year, a book was published, Next Generation Ireland. It contained 9 chapters, each of which was written by what I'd like to call an emerging expert in a particular area. They're all Irish, they're all young, and each of them was writing the chapter in their area designed to answer one simple question, which is what now? Yes, we've had those fantastic exposés about how bad the bankers were, or how bad the builders were, or how bad the politicians were. It's great to be able to read these whodunits. But the real question is, we can play the blame game, but what are we going to do now? So the book covers a range of areas, from political reform and reforming the public service to climate change and dealing with Ireland's diaspora. I was lucky enough to edit the book with a friend of mine. I was going to say an old friend from Trinity, Ed Burke, but people might get the wrong impression. The dark secret of these books is that you actually learn a lot more by editing than anyone ever will from reading. And for reasons of time, obviously, I can only go through a couple of ideas. But the general point I'd like to make is that there are a lot of smart young people out there, and they've got excellent suggestions, interesting suggestions, about how Ireland can get itself out of the mess. We just have to listen to them. And I hope this book is one contribution in that. So, for example, reading the chapter on climate change, I learned that Ireland can never really be environmentally sustainable unless we tackle 3 things: our farms, our houses, and our cars. We can look to the EU all we want for their trading schemes and so on, but until we tackle those 3 things, we'll never sort out environmental sustainability. And this can't be done at a stroke of a pen, but in the book Joe Curtin goes through the steps he thinks in each of those areas that will actually make a massive difference over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And he uses the inspiration, and I have to say I'm going to be guilty of something I gave out about earlier this week. It's what I call Scandinavia, where you cite some fantastic Nordic country and go, aren't they great, can't we be more like them? Joe actually does this quite well, in fairness to him. In his book, he talks about Denmark. In Denmark, in the 70s, they turned around after the oil crises and realized they were the most oil-dependent country in the world. And they said, we've got to change this. And it took them a while, but now they're the biggest generator of wind energy, and also the associated manufacturing that goes with it and all the jobs. They're global leaders in wind energy. And that was spotting a dream, turning it into a vision with actions, and then delivering it over the course of a generation. Similarly, on political reform, which has obviously been a hot topic this week, we need to be wary of consensus. The political system needs to be set up so that we foster dissent at the design stage, so what emerges at the end is much more robust. And Owen O'Malley in his chapter suggests a few ways that this can be done. For example, he suggests vastly reducing the size of the cabinet. Have you ever been on a committee that had 20 people that worked well? Or establishing a civil service department for the opposition. So the mindset that if you're in the civil service, you can only go the party line breaks down. Or even just changing the role of the Ceann Comhairle. Give him more powers. Make it a real position. Lastly, on our public services, we need to move away from a fallacy that lies at the heart of how public money is spent these days. The public services incur costs, but no benefits. Now, this could get blamed on economists, but I'm going to try and turn it on its head and say what we have at the moment is an accounting approach. The numbers have to add up, and everything incurs a cost. And a true economist would see not just costs, but benefits as well. And one of the things I'd like to see happen over the next 25 years is, just as Denmark did with wind energy, that we would pioneer globally a way of measuring the benefits of public services. And therefore, as soon as we know the benefits, we already know the costs, we can have a look at where money is best spent. I'm aware, though, that I don't have all day, so I haven't yet addressed the central question. Is Ireland a country for young people? And the theme of this year's school is ultimately about what the Ireland of 2016 will look like. So why don't we consider the graduating class of 2016? These are the people who are 16, 17 now. They'll be doing their Leaving Cert soon, and then they'll be graduating from college in 2016. And why don't we go one further and steal a trick from David McWilliams and call these guys who were born in the early 1990s Charlton's children. Odd as this may sound to them, in my opinion, Charlton's children are perhaps the luckiest generation that Ireland has ever had. It's not difficult to see that they're significantly luckier than the people who are in their 20s now. We've talked quite a lot about youth unemployment, and the people who are in their 20s now, they picked their college courses when Ireland's boom turned into a bubble. Their choices were skewed, and it was based on an assumption that we become victims essentially of our own success. The assumption was that as long as you go to college and get any sort of degree, there'll be a job out the other side. We know now that that's not true, that they've graduated into probably one of the toughest labour markets Ireland has ever had, and they disproportionately have skills for the wrong sectors. But the people who are in their teens now, they have clarity in when they choose their courses. I'd also argue that Charlton's children are luckier than Ireland's 30-somethings. Sure, the people who were born in the 1970s they found it very easy to get a job when they finished college. But they also found it very easy to get mortgage credit. And with house prices down by a half in the last 5 years, the people in their 30s form the bulk of the people who are in severe negative equity, often hundreds of thousands of euro of negative equity. If you gave them the chance to start over again, I'm pretty sure most of them would take it. And I don't think it's too contentious to say that Charlton's children are luckier than those born before the 70s, who typically had to scatter around the world for a livelihood. These generations didn't have the same opportunities, and they certainly didn't go to college in nearly the same numbers. As I mentioned at the start, I love my stats, so I think one or two are probably in order here. In particular, I'd like to compare Ireland's 20-somethings with Ireland's 60-somethings. If you look at 65 to 69-year-olds in Ireland, only 2 in 5 made it to the Leaving Cert, let alone beyond. Compare that to Germans, their German pen pals would have had 4 out of 5 getting to the equivalent of the Leaving Cert. Now, if we look at Ireland's 20 to 24-year-olds, they're the best qualified in Europe. Now, notwithstanding, obviously, the very good points made on Wednesday night about the quality of the education we're giving them, in terms of access to education and progress in education, the Irish are the best in Europe. Only now 1 in 10 does not have a Leaving Cert, which is the lowest rate in the EU. And if we actually look head to higher education, the proportion of people under 30 with a higher education qualification is almost a half, which is the highest in the EU. So Charlton's children are lucky because they're the first generation to see Ireland for what it is and pick their future accordingly. Ireland is a small, open economy completely dependent on its ability to sell its talent on international markets, but with plenty of opportunity for those with the right skills. Yes, there's lots of unemployment in Ireland. Yes, there's a lot of debt. And as we've heard this week, for the next few years, there's going to be tough budget after tough budget. But Ireland's teenagers can sidestep all that because they have a clean slate. Let's not forget, in a lot of talk of doom and gloom, that Ireland attracts more foreign direct investment jobs per capita than any other country in the world. The companies that come here often can't find the skills they need here, so they bring more workers here. People in Ireland are unemployed not because there's no demand for workers, but because there is demand for workers with, say, skills A, B and C, and we've got workers with skills X, Y and Z. What about all the debt we're leaving them, people will say. On that, I think we really need some perspective. I do this kind of thing on my blog, crunch some numbers and see what comes out, the graph the other side. I've done this for Ireland's debt, because I was interested in this myself. And my estimate is that by the time we balance our books, the monthly income tax bill per household, about 1.8 million households in the country, the monthly income tax bill will be about €1,300. Of that €1,300, 800 will be spent on social welfare, health and education. That's where we spend our money. Just €200 will be on repaying debt, and 50 of that is from before the crisis anyway. Only about €50 of the debt burden, of €50 of the monthly income tax bill, will be on the bankers and the bailouts and so on, what we hear most discussion about. It's certainly very expensive deposit insurance, but that's effectively what it is. It's not the be-all and end-all. So I do think, in relation to debt, we do need to have some perspective. So I think I should probably wrap up by this stage. What I've tried to show today, apart from my book, is that first, we shouldn't really be thinking of young people as some other outside the conversation. Participation is a bit like fashion. Sure, the way young people do it seems pretty odd to older people, but if you don't mind me saying so, you guys seem pretty weird to us too. Secondly, I think that if we stop and listen, as we see young people get involved, I think we'll see that Ireland's under-40s are producing some excellent contributions to public discourse. Hopefully what Ed, I and the other authors have done in Next Generation Ireland is a part of that. And the key thing is I think we need to be prepared to listen. And lastly, is Ireland a country for young people? My point today was that as long as we keep a bit of perspective, I think to me it's pretty clear that Ireland is a country for young people. I'll leave you with one more stat. A month ago, we found out that our lead had grown at the top of one of the most important league tables, the one measuring birth rates. Ireland's birth rate is 17 per 1,000, which is the way they measure it. It's well clear of second place, which is the UK and France at 13 per 1,000, and it's more than twice the rate in Germany. I should have included some Scandinavian ones there, so we can beat them at something. So I would say that Ireland is not just a country for young people, Ireland is a country of young people. Thank you very much.